Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're really focusing on Congress in context. For those of you who follow the Hill closely, we're trying to cut through some of the noise around recent legislative activity. We want to distill the debates, the decisions that are shaping policy, and, well, ultimately impacting you.
Yeah, our mission here is really to shed some light on how voices from different districts come together, or sometimes clash, and how that reflects what everyday Americans are concerned about. We'll be looking at how Congress is working, or, sometimes really grappling with its own complex processes.
Right. Our goal is to bring you those key bits of knowledge
Yeah.
straight from the legislative heart, make sense of complex stuff, and give you those aha moments about what's really going on. So what does it all mean for you? Let's get into it. Okay, so kicking things off in Washington this week. What's the bill that's really been grabbing the headlines?
Oh, without a doubt. It's the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, usually just called OBBB. It's been a huge talking point. Its supporters are definitely touting it as transformative, touches, well, everything from energy to taxes.
Okay, transformative. So what are the core ideas there from the proponents' view?
Well, if you connect it to the bigger picture, supporters say the bill aims to significantly cut red tape on domestic energy. That means things like reopening federal lands for drilling, streamlining refinery regulations. We heard one member predicting this would directly lead to lower gas prices, saving families money this summer. They said when America produces more energy, we pay less at the pump.
And beyond energy, you mentioned tax relief. It sounds like that's a major part of the OBBB, too.
Oh, absolutely. A very big part. The bill proposes making bonus depreciation permanent. Same for the small business deduction and R&D tax credits. These are things that are often temporary, right? So making them permanent, the argument goes, gives businesses that long-term stability to invest.
Okay, stability for businesses. What about for individuals?
Yeah, it would also suspend taxes on tips and overtime pay and significantly increase the child tax credit to $2,200, linking it to inflation. And yes, there's even a provision in there for nationwide school choice, giving parents scholarships for different school options.
Those are definitely significant proposals from the supporter side. What about the economic forecasts tied to all this? What are they saying?
Well, the supporters, they forecast a pretty substantial impact. We're talking as much as 4.9% higher GDP, maybe up to $10,000 more per year for a typical family. And they even project $6 trillion in deficit reduction. They're citing the Council of Economic Advisors, claiming, similar policies led to accurate predictions before.
But as you can probably guess, this bill has some pretty strong critics. They paint a very, very different picture. We'll definitely unpack that side of things in the political dynamics part. But for now, status. Where does it stand?
A Senate vote is expected very soon. Could be Friday night, maybe Saturday morning. It's moving fast.
Okay, so beyond that huge economic package, there was another important bill moving, H.R. 3944. That's the Military Construction and Veterans Affairs Funding Bill for fiscal year 2026, affects national security infrastructure, and really crucially, veteran care. How did that one fare?
Right, so H.R. 3944, it passed the House, but it was close, 219 to 206, shows it was contentious. From the supporters' view, it provides full funding for veterans' health care and benefits. That includes the critical PACT Act funding.
That's for the toxic exposure burn pits, right?
Exactly, expanding care for those veterans. It also puts resources into mental health, fighting homelessness among vets, and supports military bases, especially focusing on deterrence in the Indo-Pacific.
We also heard proponents arguing it helps inspire the next generation. Claims that recruitment is way up under recent leadership because of a, quote, new culture of strength and support. But, like the OBBB, this one faced strong opposition too, which we'll get to.
Definitely. But, on a more cooperative note, something interesting this week was the bipartisan FIT Procurement Act. This really stands out as a genuine bipartisan effort. It's about improving how the government buys tech.
How so?
Well, the idea is to raise cost caps, cut down bureaucracy, make it easier for agencies to get innovative tools, and also easier for small businesses to sell to the government. Could save taxpayer money, spur innovation. It shows that sometimes both sides can agree on efficiency fixes.
It's good to see those moments. Now, a lot of the groundwork happens in committees, often away from the main spotlight. What caught your eye there?
Absolutely. The Senate Veterans Affairs Committee, for instance, held a hearing looking into correcting mismanagement of the Veterans Crisis Line, important oversight there. And over in the House, the Ways and Means Health Subcommittee looked at health at your fingertips, all about harnessing digital health data.
And Congress definitely covers a wide range. House Ways and Means subcommittees on Social Security and Work and Welfare had a joint hearing on Social Security with Commissioner Bisignano. Plus, the Select Committee on Competition with the Chinese Communist Party tackled algorithms and authoritarians, focusing on why USAI needs to lead. These hearings really show the sheer breadth of challenges Congress is wrestling with right now, from vet support to AI's future.
Okay, so with those bills and committee actions as backdrop, let's dig into the political dynamics, the real friction points. The One Big Beautiful Bill Act seems like a perfect example of that deep partisan divide on the economy. We heard the pro side. What's the pushback?
Oh, absolutely. The OBBB really highlights fundamental differences. Supporters talk tax cuts, energy independence, growth. Opponents, though, we heard one speaker call it a budget that raises costs for working families, adds red tape for patients, and gives handouts to billionaires. They're warning it could risk the collapse of rural healthcare systems because of major Medicaid cuts they see in it. And one senator even called it a big, beautiful betrayal, accusing it of creating trillions in new debt. What were those numbers again?
Yeah, the critics estimate $3.4 trillion over 10 years and over $30 trillion over 30 years. They say it uses magic math and gimmicks to hide the real cost, which, directly contradicts the proponents' claim of deficit reduction.
So how do we, as listeners, even begin to reconcile these completely opposite financial forecasts for the exact same bill? It's confusing.
It is, and that's really the core challenge. The different numbers often come down to different starting assumptions, different economic models, and, frankly, what gets counted as a cost or a saving. One side might assume much higher economic growth from tax cuts, which lowers the projected deficit in their model. The other side might forecast less growth, bigger revenue losses leading to higher debt projections. It's less simple math, more about which economic theory you subscribe to.
And this really hits home when you get to the proposed Medicaid cuts. That debate gets incredibly personal, doesn't it? Opponents warned it would, quote, push rural hospitals and clinics over the cliff, called them cuts to care that keep my constituents alive. The human impact is just stark.
It is. But then, on the other side, proponents push back hard, saying these aren't cuts. They frame them as common sense work requirements for able-bodied adults without children. One member cited CBO figures, claiming millions on Medicaid are ineligible or could work. Their argument is that Medicaid should serve the truly needy, not those who refuse to help themselves. They see work requirements as a path to dignity and independence.
That letter we heard snippet of really drove home the human side. The father, Britton Winter Rose, saying, without Medicaid, my daughter's next nap could be her last. It just grounds these huge policy debates in the reality of families' lives. And medical experts warning about untold hardship and deaths, especially for kids, or community health centers potentially closing.
Yeah, potentially not being able to keep the doors open, it puts a face on the numbers. And shifting back to that Military Construction and Veterans Affairs Bill, H.R. 3944, even though both sides say they're committed to veterans, the debate showed deep splits there, too. Critics argued it underfunds military construction by $904 million compared to the president's request, and that it fails to fund some specific needs, like installation resilience or NATO infrastructure, which is concerning given the situation with Russia and Ukraine.
Another point raised was the lack of dedicated funding. Zero dedicated funding for mitigating extreme weather damage on military bases, despite huge costs from past events like Hurricane Michael costing almost $5 billion, or Typhoon Mawar. And there were also those accusations that the bill is a step toward privatization of the VA, which, according to one member, veterans overwhelmingly oppose. They want VA hospitals. Let's turn to foreign policy. We heard some really strong statements about recent military actions against Iran, some members expressing, well, immense pride in what they called decisive strategic strikes and Operation Midnight Hammer, talking about peace through strength, and claiming Iran is no longer on the verge of obtaining a nuclear weapon, mentioning 18-hour B-2 bomber flights, submarine missile launches.
Right, but that brings up a really critical counterpoint about transparency. Other members voiced serious concern. They pointed to a supposedly leaked classified battle damage assessment from the Defense Intelligence Agency that apparently disputes the administration's success claims. This led to calls for much more transparency, direct briefings from intel officials. One senator asked point blank, what is the administration hiding?
So it's not just about this specific operation.
Exactly. It taps into that long-standing tension between the executive branch's power and Congress's constitutional role in declaring war. One senator really emphasized not ceding that power, saying, one should never send our sons and daughters into war without the consent of the American people. It's a fundamental constitutional issue.
Immigration enforcement, another flashpoint. We heard sharp criticism about oversight. Members describing a blatant disregard for the constitutional role of Congress, citing ignored subpoenas, blocked testimony.
Yeah, we heard firsthand accounts. Members trying to visit ICE processing centers and being denied access. They detailed what they called inhumane and unlawful detention of immigrant families, accusations of arbitrary arrest quotas, aggressive tactics by ICE, causing, quote, significant confusion, fear, and terror in communities, specifically mentioning the Korean American community in Southern California whose businesses were apparently suffering due to fear.
And the core argument there.
That Congress has a constitutional role to perform oversight. And denying that access, well, it undermines democracy itself.
We also heard about the intersection of state and federal politics on reproductive rights, an example from Ohio.
Yes, a speaker highlighted how Ohio voters put reproductive freedom in their state constitution, but then state lawmakers introduced extreme anti-choice bills anyway, disregarding the will of the voters, as they put it.
And related to that, the debate over abortion medication, mifepristone.
Right. While some celebrated the Dobbs decision, others raised alarms about new data suggesting, potentially, a higher rate of serious complications from chemical abortion pills than the FDA currently acknowledges. One member claimed nearly 1 in 10 women experience serious complications, calling it 22 times higher than acknowledged. And that's fueling pushes to bring back requirements for in-person dispensing. The argument being that it allows providers to screen for things like gestational age, ectopic pregnancies, or signs of abuse.
So lots of intense division. But you mentioned earlier there were some bipartisan moments.
Yes, despite all the conflict, it's important to note those. The FIT Procurement Act we talked about, improving government tech buying, that's a solid example. Republicans and Democrats working together on a practical fix to make government more efficient, save taxpayer money.
And we also heard from a Pennsylvania congressman who's a cancer survivor himself. He spoke really powerfully about the importance of bipartisan investment in research for diseases like Alzheimer's, highlighting that ongoing support for innovation that gets us closer to treatments and cures. It shows that even with major disagreements elsewhere, common ground can sometimes be found for the public good.
Definitely. And, if we zoom out a bit, connect this to the bigger picture. These debates over the OBBB, they really echo long-standing arguments about fiscal responsibility, the government's role in the economy. It reminds you of past tax cuts debates, the Bush tax cuts, the Trump tax cuts, and their impact on the national debt. It's a recurring theme.
It really is. And it's fascinating how peace through strength keeps coming up in foreign policy across different administrations into decades, while at the same time, you have these constant concerns about presidential war powers, going right back to the War Powers Act of '73 and even Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution itself, the part giving Congress the power to declare war. These aren't new arguments, are they? They just keep resurfacing in new context that underlines those enduring constitutional tensions. And the impact of all this policy really does trickle down. It affects everyone, not just folks in D.C. The OBBB promises lower gas prices, tax relief for families, but critics say it raises costs for others, disproportionately helps billionaires. And the student loan debates show a clear split too, some pushing plans like SAVE to stop debt being a millstone, others focused on reform so taxpayers don't shoulder others' debt.
And you really see the direct impact on veterans. The H.R. 3944 discussions show commitment to their health care, yes, but also those real concerns about potential VA privatization. That could fundamentally change how veterans get care. Then you have those specific debates about alternative therapies, psychedelics for PTSD, cannabis for pain. These directly affect treatment options available to vets. We heard one member share his own experience with heavy meds after an injury, advocating for doctors to at least be able to discuss cannabis without fear of reprisal.
And those Medicaid cut debates hit rural communities, hard, vulnerable people, like that family we heard about, whose child depends on it for life-saving care. The immigration debates affect countless families, communities, especially diverse ones like the Korean American community mentioned in Southern California, dealing with fear from ICE raids.
Which brings up, the actual mechanics of how laws get made, the day-to-day process. You've heard how bills go from introduction to committee markups, floor debates, roll call votes, the whole dynamic between the House and Senate, even things like using unanimous consent requests, which just one single member can block. That highlights how complex the procedures can be. We even heard a prayer from the House chaplain earlier, a sort of subtle reminder of the context surrounding the work.
And we saw those clear examples of congressional oversight in action. Or maybe the challenges to oversight. When members try to visit federal facilities and get blocked, told to just send an email to dhs.gov instead of being allowed in. It's a powerful reminder that getting laws passed, or even just doing basic oversight, it can be a real battle of wills, procedures. It really underscores that Congress is supposed to be a co-equal branch.
So looking ahead, what's the most immediate thing to watch? Probably that upcoming Senate vote on the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. Its fate, pass or fail, will have major ripple effects. Economy, healthcare, taxes. The debates really showed those fundamental disagreements about fiscal responsibility, with critics warning it could shatter existing accountability structures.
Right. And we'll also see ongoing debates around appropriations bills like H.R. 3944 as they continue through the process. Plus the push-pull on things like the SOR Act for student loans. And that discussion about the STOP-C-SAM Act hints at future debates, too, balancing child protection online with encryption and privacy concerns. That's always a tough one.
It really leads you to think about the broader trends, the direction things are heading. We're clearly seeing this tension over the size and scope of government, especially around safety nets like Medicaid, the future of healthcare, and that persistent friction between the executive and legislative branches in foreign policy, domestic enforcement. And the reproductive rights debate isn't going away either, as states figure out Dobbs and federal policy on medication access keeps evolving.
Yeah, it's clear. Themes like economic opportunity, national security, individual liberties, they're going to keep driving things in Congress, often leading to pretty intense partisan clashes. But these discussions also really highlight how important citizen engagement is, because these policies directly touch everyday life. So this deep dive into Congress and context has hopefully shown you just how much is happening and how it connects back to you.
Which brings us to, well, the practical question. How can you stay informed and actually make your voice heard effectively?
Well, first off, you can find and actually read the bills we talked about, like H.R. 3944 or the proposed S1220. Congress.gov is the place for that. It's really a goldmine of information bill text, status, votes, summaries. You can also look at the Congressional Record to see the exact words spoken on the floor, like the quotes we pulled today.
And contacting your representative. Their official websites almost always have contact forms, phone numbers, expressing your views, whether it's on Medicaid funding, student loans, congressional oversight, whatever matters to you. It really can make a difference. Remember what one member said, "The world is run by the people who show up."
Keep an eye out for those upcoming votes we mentioned, especially the Senate action on the OBBB. Also, watch for developments on things like the debate over psychedelic therapies for veterans. Will the VA be ready to implement those nationwide if approved? That's a key question.
And remember, voting is crucial, but it's not the only way to participate. Advocating for community services, getting involved with local groups, or even just staying consistently informed on issues you care about, your engagement is vital.
So what stands out to you after listening today? What issue maybe sparked your interest to explore further? The things discussed today really underscore that constant push and pull of governing and your role within it. We hope this deep dive helps you feel a bit more connected to what's happening on Capitol Hill.